Thank you. As Noreen said, I'll be talking about linking library data today. My original subtitle, and the one you saw in the abstract, was Exploring Connections with Regular Data. But I'm capable of, along with not sitting and talking, I have trouble sticking with one subtitle, so I added a second, which is A Librarian Looked at the World and Saw It Was Messy. And so who am I, and who am I to tell you that the world is messy? Well, I'm a librarian. I am a cataloger. I work with private book collectors, and I catalog and describe their collections. Every collection, of course, is unique, because every person is unique. I don't see any clones in the audience, so you'll see. I am also a programmer, or I have been a programmer. I've worked on the Koha open source integrated library system, which is the traditional way, which is software for traditional library management. And I've worked on various other projects, but let's go back for a moment to this concept of a traditional integrated library system. And in fact, let's think about what a traditional integrated library system uses. It uses traditional data. Everyone must be really happy to see something like that. I mean, you look at it and go, wow, I haven't a clue what that means. This format was designed in the 1960s for printing catalog cards, like your card catalog, go to the library, open a drawer. We don't use those anymore, most of them. So, fortunately, I don't actually have to write things like that. I write things like this, which is better anyway. I mean, it's not all one long line, but that's not really friendly. I mean, if I were to choose a random person in the audience and say, I've been thinking about the field 043. Show of hands, how many people would be willing to respond to a conversation that starts with one person?
It's lacking consonants.
So we have one person in the audience who's willing to talk at 043. For the rest of us, 043, 082, 245, 260, 651. These are not numbers that we really want to burn indelibly into the backs of our eyelids. Nor should they be. And they're just numbers. They are there because in the 60s, this was a very efficient way to store data. But I said traditional integrated library system, so there must be some way to use it, and sure enough, we can use this. This is what you see at your, or very similar to what you see at your public library. In the catalog, we have a title, we have our author, we have a nice picture of the cover, we have some subjects, we have some notes. There are bibliographical references and an index. Might be useful to know this sometime, maybe. But at its most basic, this doesn't actually tell me anything useful. It tells me about a book, but not why I should care. There are a lot of books about which I don't care. Why should I start caring about this one? Oh, let's see. Nicholas II. Actually, I know a little bit about Nicholas II. Not a lot, but a little bit. During the reign of Nicholas II, Russia lost the Russo-Japanese War, entered World War I, and had a revolution. But wait, maybe I'm interested in the Russo-Japanese War. The Russo-Japanese War was fought in southern Manchuria over port access to the Pacific. Well, wait, actually I'm interested in Manchuria. I'm not sure why, but there is interesting information in this book that I did not know about, because I read this and I went, A People's Tragedy, Feige's Orlando, it's a book published. So there must be some way to get at some of this interesting information, right? How about linked data? Linked data is a big thing in the semantic web. We can use linked data. It's going to allow us to take everything we know, combine it all together in novel new, oh boy. Can anyone read that? No, neither can I. And actually, I'm going to let you in on a secret. Even if I had made this large enough to read, I wouldn't be able to read it. This is data for a computer, not data for a person. But I'm a person, and so is everyone else, really. So what about data for us? What about information for us? Well, let's talk about linking data. Not linked data, but just linking. Let's take things we know about Nicholas II, about Russo-Japanese War, about Manchuria, and let's think about where it came from. Well, we know the World Wide Web. That's all about linking. Hypertext, hyperlinks. This is what we do on the web. We go to Wikipedia, start at Nicholas II, and see how many steps it takes to reach philosophy. 5, by the way. But let's think for a moment about the data that went into this linked data that went into the record, and let's think about where it came from. Well, someone typed it in. The computer did not just spontaneously say, aha, I know this book. I may have, but as it happens, I did not. But I might have looked at it and said, oh, I know this book, I know everything about it, and just typed it in a few seconds. But whoever entered this data in, whether it was me, whether it was you, whether it was someone we don't know in California, that person knew something about the book, that person knew something about the subject, that person knew something, at least, and they didn't tell us. Let's look at it. That person may have known about the Russo-Japanese War, and I see nothing in this record that tells me about it. It's just not mentioned, even though some human thought about this and realized, hey, this book is relevant if you're interested in the Russo-Japanese War. So why don't we start over with our data? We have to enter data anyway at some point, otherwise it won't be in the computer. But let's enter what matters to us. In the course of working with my collectors, I've found that the traditional data is not very useful to them. These collectors have very particular and often unusual interests. They want to know about copper coins of ancient Rome. They're not interested in Greek silver. So really I should be focusing on Roman copper coins when I'm talking about the context. And there's no way to do that in my traditional library catalog. Or if there is, it is a matter of subverting the system, not leveraging the system. So I developed a new system called Biblionarrator, which can take this same legacy data, but instead of what we did before, which is it's really just text, we're going to talk about linking. So we see here's our record in the center, and then we have connections to Soviet Union history, revolution. Here's Russian history, Nicholas II. And these are the things that people actually care about when they're reading about a book, not the name. Maybe they care about the name of the author, but for this book, probably not, because what really matters is the content, not necessarily the same content for every person, But for people who read this book, what matters is content. So what could we do if we were to say, well, I'm sitting here, I'm already going to be entering in some of this information. Why don't I write about some of what matters in my context? You know, let's, actually, if you'll indulge me for a moment, I'm going to put on my entrepreneur's hat, and I'm going to tell you something. I think that we can actually add value here. I think as a cataloger or as a person who knows things, we can add value. What would this value look like? It would look like this. I recorded a video of me typing a bit about the history of Russia during Nicholas II, because I wasn't sure I was going to be using my laptop. And well, I wasn't expecting that. So you already saw me typing that very quickly. And now, if someone is interested in Nicholas II, they have a little bit of background. And this is not linked data. We did not extract this from a massive and rather complex technical data store. This came from my mind. I sat down and I wrote what I knew, which was a little bit about Nicholas II's 23-year reign. So there's one problem with this. This is great on an individual level. I can add information. I can link whatever I want. It's going to be great. But haven't we already done some of this? I mean, hasn't someone somewhere written about Nicholas II of Russia? Well, yeah. And this is where we might see linked data coming in. And we could use linked data, that's capital L, capital D, to extract some of this data from Wikipedia. We know Nicholas II is the Emperor of Russia. We look up the same Nicholas II, Emperor of Russia, in Wikipedia, and we pull relevant data. Of course, the world's not perfect. As I was writing my optimistic slides about how great it would be, I wanted to clarify how it would work. And so it turns out there are a few problems. The biggest problem from my point of view as an individual, and I am not an expert, I'm just an ordinary cataloger trying to add some information for the people who are using my catalog. Linked data is kind of complicated. I need to understand the ontology. I need to develop a way of relating my data to your data, even though you and I may never have spoken, and we may not see eye to eye on what our data means. But one day, I am at the very least hopeful, if not optimistic, we are going to find a way to automatically extract not just the Nicholas II of Russia, that's easy. And there are only so many people named Nicholas II of Russia. One person. So we can sort of figure that one out using a bit of programming. But for the more complicated information, the context that we really need, we still have a ways to go with our semantic web, with linked data. But let's just move on. It's getting depressing, really. So let's go back to what I've been doing with the software I developed, Biblionarrator. And I can talk about Biblionarrator until blue in the face. Ask around if you can confirm very blue. But let's look let's look ahead. Biblionarrator is great. I think it's a huge step in the right direction. It makes the collections I work with useful, but what comes next? And I don't think it is the end of the evolution of information architecture. I think it's a step forward, maybe a big one. I like to think so, but maybe not. But what could we do if we were to take this approach, which says, let's start with what I can do today, and what do we have our linked data for? And I thought of a few things that we could automatically extract information and link context where a person doesn't have to sit down. And right now, we need a person, but there's research in artificial intelligence, and perhaps a limited agent could begin doing some of that contextual linking that I've been calling for. Perhaps not. But what about human-centered big data? Big data sounds really, really cool to me. But as a human and a non-data scientist human, I'm not sure I entirely understand what I'm seeing when I look at something that I've been told is big data. Mostly what I'm seeing is a lot of data, actually. And my hope is that if we take these small steps, if we say, I'm a single person, what value can I add right now? How can I contextualize my information right now? We will end up at the point where we can use linked data for all the projects that we've, or at least the project that we will be hearing about in a little while, and extract new and different value from the system that we don't right now. Also, I think Laureano will be talking about some of what he sees in the future for this sort of linking and the, shall we say, democratization of content, not content generation, but content addition to this work. And thank you very much. I went a little over what I planned, but I guess I also had a slot twice as long as I realized. So if there are any questions, I am happy to take them.
And we do have time for questions if you want to ask.
Question? Something that I'm thinking a lot about in our library is how to manage content created by our librarians and curators. How to do something with it. We have a lot of it being created for a lot of different reasons. It's not managed or coordinated as it could or should be if we want to have a future. And something that just occurs to me is, during our presentation, is that we could begin to put the type of content that's created, especially in, librarians love these things called libguides. We could begin to put this type of information and work in some different ways if we were able to work on the same team, much like what you demonstrated there using your Biblionarrator tool.
Absolutely. I think that okay, I don't know how to do history. But I think that's absolutely possible if this is a Biblionarrator installation for public library. But there is no reason that a researcher wouldn't be interested in some of that information from the libguide right here. If you do a search for Alexander McCall Smith and you have a libguide that includes biographical information about bestsellers of the 21st century, why shouldn't that appear first in the results? And the Sunday Philosophy Club is a great book, I'm sure, but if someone's searching for Alexander McCall Smith, maybe they about Alexander McCall Smith. I think absolutely the key is getting the data out of their various library silos, putting it all together where it can communicate with each other and with the user.
To that end, I would also say, the second thing that came to my mind was, we have our e-reserve staff assembling essentially digital bibliographies that have been created by our faculty. And in doing this, they're also kind of making distinctions that may also be helpful in this context.
Right, yes, absolutely. And one thing that I perhaps should have said about my approach with Biblionarrator is there's actually no assumption that any given record is for a book or for anything bibliographical at all. So I could absolutely have a record for, Professor Smith's anthropology research class. And I think that varies.
What's a private collector?
Sure. So I work with individuals who, they collect books primarily. So these will be people with anywhere between, let's say, 2,000 and 40,000 books, mostly in their homes. Some of them have separate libraries. Generally, the books tend to be antiquarian, rare in some way. But my definition, at least from a business point of view, is a collector would be someone who has a particular interest and is collecting books specifically to do with that interest. And many collectors will try to acquire, for example, every single edition of the book they're interested in, or every single book and edition ever written by the author they're interested in, or there's any number of variations, but it tends to be a very deep and focused collection where the sort of subject heading that we saw in the 5G's record would just not be enough information. I don't have any nonfiction books here to show you, but and that sort of broad Russian history up during the reign of Nicholas II, that's not sufficiently specific if your interest is only books published between 1896 and 1897 in Russia. Every book is Russian history during the reign of Nicholas II.
So do you know what you're searching? Can I ask just a couple of follow-ups on that? Do you know what you're searching for, or are you supposed to discover something that isn't self-evident in the information that's out there already?
It depends. And for some collectors, they know exactly what their focuses or foci are. And in that case, it's mostly a matter of categorizing books within their worldview. For many collectors, they don't really know exactly what's interesting about their collection, and the reason they call me in is because they turn around and suddenly they have 7,000 volumes related to 18th century Scotland,
Sorry.
and they don't really know why, or how to explain to people, this is why my entire dining room is packed floor to ceiling with books. In which case, it's a very open-ended research question, trying to understand the overall context of the collection and capture that context in their catalog, be it online or written or what have you.
I'm wondering, in your presentation about the linked data, it seemed like it was a solution that Amazon has. They show you pictures of books, then they have a description of the book as well, plus they have the reviewers. So that's why if I'm looking for a book, you know, I generally go there to make my decision before I decide to buy it or not. And sometimes they show even a preview of a few pages from the book. So wouldn't that also be a solution?
Yes, the challenge for me with the Amazon.com approach is simply that I don't have the resources that Amazon can bring to bear. So, you know, what I showed you was my one person's approach to what Amazon is able to do with, you know, a lot of really, really talented people, both programmers and content creators, whereas, you know, I'm one person, so I have to lower my expectations to what I can feasibly accomplish in 24 hours a day.
Do you think that an algorithm could get at that more precisely than you did, or can you express a little bit which component you brought to that, what aspect of your insight you brought to the search?
If you mean in terms of the value I was adding,
Yes, exactly.
ideally an algorithm should be able to do, I'm not going to say as well, but you know, it should do fairly well. What I am bringing is the ability to figure out which piece of information is relevant, and as your knowledge base increases in size, algorithms are going to do better and better. They're going to see, okay, this is what what this collector is interested in, so this is the information I'll choose. But especially when we're starting where we are right now with library catalogs, which is absolute ground zero. Basically what you see on this screen, this is the information in the library catalog. Anything that's not written here is not available to an algorithm. Is there a question?
I think you have one person.
So going back to the whole link data slide that you had, I've seen research where researchers can take short snippets of text and come up with a list of concepts from Wikipedia that are similar to that. Is there any way you could potentially use those kind of concepts, just like basic lexical matching?
Yes, absolutely. I haven't really done that yet, but certainly that is part of the plan. A lot of the links I'm generating from legacy data are actually using similar lexical matching and sort of clustering to figure out where a link should be. It's not necessarily really clear from the data. I figure the computer can give me a decent idea, and I can avoid looking at 140,000 records.
Right.
And also, I think that there's an aspect that we didn't address that Amazon doesn't do, even though digital books can now give you the capacity, which are indexing and citing. Two things that happen inside of books,
Yes.
which contextualize them and really put you in the intellectual environment and show you what the author is relying upon or pointing to as further resources. So the index and the citing within the book is really what gives you a view. When you go on Amazon, what you're seeing is what people are buying that's similar to it and what someone who's active in recommending is interested in sharing. And oftentimes, particularly where religion, politics, fashion, and other areas of scrutiny, of investigation come into play, then Amazon really gets away from the core of what a serious reader would be interested in understanding about that book. So I think that's one idea of how data gives you a very different picture than a human perspective in the sense of human-generated present perspective. Because the book itself, of course, was indexed than the sites were made by human beings who were writing the content in the first place, a much richer picture. And the idea is how to liberate that and what is an ontology and how does that work, and do ontologies talk to each other, understand each other. So it gets into a much deeper, richer picture. So it's not a question, but I think that's where your mind might have been partly. And
Yes, yes.
so,
Absolutely, and I don't have the wireless set up here, but if you look at PubMed, their interface, you'll see some of what Loriana was talking about with the citations and references actually being interrelated, being listed and shown in the interface. They are not linked in quite the same way, which I feel makes for a less rich research experience, but it is there, and I think that is definitely an important way forward. I think we did
I
good.
think, yeah, we're going to go to the next, but thank you, Karen.
Thank you, Chair.